Hello and welcome back to the Pulse Social Sports podcast, where this week we're talking to Luke Evans, an individual responsible for a startup company making games, as he talks about the ideas of workplace wellness and how corporate sports and mental health has all affected him.
Just wanted to open out and just say thanks for coming in and taking the time and talking to us. Really.
Oh, not at all. Thank you for having me.
What does your company do?
Cool. Yeah. So we produce social card games. So the idea is we ask that question: how well do you know your friends or your family or your colleagues, really the people you spend the most time with, and how well do they know you in turn? And we try to make a game of it. So we've sort of got 8 games now, themed from everything from your emotional intelligence to your imagination to a game for couples, for one that's more kid-centric, and try to find all those different aspects of your personality that possibly don't come out in your day-to-day life, and see how well do people really know the true you.
No, definitely. It sounds really interesting about the whole company aspect. So, if you don't mind me opening, just continuing things. How and why did you choose to start making games?
Yeah, well, so it's a family business. So I work with my dad, my brother, and my mum, and then often actually the other people are sort of mates and that we get involved when it suits them. And the whole history of the company is my dad's always had an interest in games, but sort of life went a different way for him, and he ended up in the corporate sector. And probably when we were younger, not wrong in saying that we weren't massively close, me and my dad. But one of the things we did always bond over was games, which you play at the weekend, you play on holidays, it's that kind of stuff. And so when he sort of decided that actually he'd had enough in the corporate sector and wanted to try out his own thing, and he said, well, I'm going to sort of start making games, would you like to be a part of it? And I thought, well, that's sort of not an opportunity that comes around that often. I thought, yeah, that sounds really cool. And so that was almost 10 years ago now. So here we are, sort of 10 years later, still doing the same thing. And we've been fortunate that the reception has been really positive.
No, definitely. And obviously your game's linked to the idea of social health. What would you define really as social health?
It's a really good question. It's one of these terms that's quite new, but also I think it's something we all understand intuitively. It's that concept of what is the quality of your relationships with other people? It's that concept of when you are surrounded by a group of people, do you still feel lonely? It's all of these different things that make up how you interpret your own social well-being, I suppose is another way of putting it. Everything from do you feel that you can be open and vulnerable with other people? Do you feel self-confident in these situations? Are you self-aware of how you're perceived by people? And can you really feel sort of empathy for people in situations that you're unlikely to ever experience yourself? It's quite a nuanced thing, but it's a very sort of key part of mental health, which is obviously being spoken about quite a lot at the moment.
No, definitely, I completely agree. And obviously, you mentioned that you were quite heavily involved with the corporate side and corporate industries. Would you say that stress in the workplace and linking to corporates is becoming more of an issue in the modern day?
I think it definitely is an issue. I think it's quite although I think everyone understands what stress is in the workplace, it's also incredibly individual. What you find stressful and what someone else may find stressful can be totally different. I think that's where this whole concept of sort of empathy is understanding that what you may find very sort of what might not bother you so much, some people might find very stressful, and vice versa. Some people, for example, it's that classic one of some people prefer sort of giving presentations, are quite happy to do that, but find maybe the work where they have to sit down by themselves actually quite stress inducing. Could be a totally reverse situation for someone else. So with everything going on from lockdowns to COVID to the general anxiety around employment and the just job sector in general, it's definitely something that's become exacerbated, but it's still quite a unique situation for everyone, I think.
Definitely. And if you don't mind me throwing one in there, obviously, so you mentioned the idea that stress is being handled differently. Would you almost say that some forms of work stress are being glorified in a way? For example, if you had a coworker who went, oh, I was up until 2 a.m., let's say, working on a project, would you almost say that that's being a bit glamorized a bit too much in the sense of, oh, what a hard worker, and not being seen as, why is this person staying up this late to finish something?
Absolutely. I think it's an incredibly nuanced thing, and it really comes down often to sort of workplace culture. I think there's a real almost a belief, and sometimes rightly or wrongly, but basically that the more hours you put in means you're being more productive, or means that your results are going to be say more significant than someone who puts in less hours. Now, so like if you take the extremes, of course that's going to be true to some regard, but also it's worth noting that that isn't necessarily the case. In fact, just sort of sometimes just sitting there behind a desk for hours or whatever the job may be, sometimes it's particular, I suppose, in office work, but sometimes actually more hours doesn't necessarily contribute to greater productivity. And that's where it comes into everything from what's your workplace environment like? Are you getting enough rest outside of work? Because I think you can't, unfortunately, you know, as human beings, we don't have just infinite reserves of energy. You do need recuperation time to make sure that you're sort of working at full capacity. And when there's that pressure to always feel that you should be constantly on at work, regardless of whether you're at home or whether you're sort of out and about, or whether you should be contacted on weekends, or all this kind of stuff, it can just lead to feeling burnt out and feeling like you've never got this work-life balance in check at all.
No, definitely, I completely agree. And just keeping to the topic of the amount of hours that people are putting in at work, the Personnel Today released an article about working more hours because of working from home and not actually being able to physically leave the office per se. Do you think that this is damaging for the mental health within workers?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll speak personally first because it's as a startup, one of the things I never appreciated when I sort of started working on my own company was that the whole work-life divide just totally becomes obliterated, because you're working in either your bedroom or your dining room or anywhere really that you can bring your laptop. You're taking calls and doing stuff at the weekends, and I think that whole culture of separating a work life, not having a different destination that you go to to do that sort of productivity and stuff, and then come home and feel that your home is a totally separate environment, can just lead to this very insidious thing where you're actually working all the time and you don't realize it. An hour here, an hour there, a half hour here, checking an email there, can really quickly add up to just being constantly on that expectation that you're going to still be contactable at 11 o'clock at night, or 2 p.m. on a Saturday, even when perhaps that all could have waited until normal working hours. And then I think the final thing here is a big aspect that's sort of, inadvertently been lost, is that culture, that social environment of work. When you're sort of working by yourself, even if you could quite comfortably do the same work socially distanced and from remote locations, you're possibly not getting that sort of very low level social environment that's really important just for human beings to function. So just that, that casual remark you might make to someone, or the conversation you have on the way to ask someone rather than popping them an email. It's all of this like small stuff that might not be bad for a week or two, but when you add it up over a sustained period of time, can be really, really damaging.
No, definitely. And would you say that, because obviously this the whole concept of kind of workers being stressed and then bosses maybe having to hide their stress, or kind of saying, oh, I'm in charge, so everything has to be okay with me, when sometimes really it isn't. Do you think that bosses being open about their mental health struggles can make them seem more approachable and improve the workplace environment?
Absolutely. I think it's sort of like a top-down approach. If senior staff are happy to sort of show that being open about mental health struggles you're having, being not afraid to disclose actually when they're struggling, not just constantly having to feel as if they've got the pressure to sort of say, oh no, everything's fine, no worries here, I'm absolutely fine, just so they project that image of sort of strength. Actually realizing that there's a whole other side of strength, which is being able to be open about the things that you're struggling with. And so if that sort of starts at a senior level, that cultural effect will just trickle down into everyone else, because I think people look up rather, to see what's the expectation. Am I going to be penalized for saying that I'm struggling? Am I going to be excluded from things if I admit that I'm having difficulties? And that's not just in work; it's outside of work as well, because obviously the two aren't quite separate as maybe we'd sometimes like to think. So I definitely think there's a massive impact when senior staff show that no, this is all fine. This is how you could do things, and actually the results are going to be a lot better for it, because people are going to feel more understood and less lonely.
No, definitely. And then kind of keeping into that same theme of workplace wellness. Do you think that workplaces, especially offices, should take mental and physical health activities into consideration, such as kind of stress relief yoga or anything along those sorts?
Absolutely. I think all of this stuff can really help. And obviously, it's a case of weighing up the pros and cons each time. But I think the main point is it's worth noting that like the 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 productivity of people and what people are able to do during their work hours is not just influenced, as we were saying earlier, by just sitting at a desk. It's your whole mindset. It's your whole sort of approach to work and the people around you. So anything that sort of fosters I suppose an environment where you feel that you can talk to people, because there's obviously stuff like physical activities, like say, for example, yoga stuff, if that suits people, to just being allocated time in the day to be able to sort of get up, stretch your legs, not feel that, you're sort of being penalized for, even just walking to the toilet, for example, but that you can actually feel you could sort of, do some stretches, all this kind of stuff that goes on throughout the day. Anything that really helps you feel as if this your work environment is a place where you can sort of perform at your best. All of that stuff is going to just have a massive contribution to the bottom line. And then with regards to sort of your social health, any kind of activities that feel as if you are getting to know your colleagues on a more personal level. So things, for example, there's sometimes a focus on you just need to know people in their work environment and not knowing how they are outside of work. Just their personality, doesn't have to be anything serious, just generally how as they are as a person outside of a work environment has no bearing on sort of your work performance and team performance. But actually, if you really feel you get someone and you really feel that they get you, that's just going to have a massive contribution to the whole team environment.
No, I completely agree with that. And when you were working in the corporate environment and when you were spending your time in these places, were there wellness activities that you experienced, and do you think they were effective at all?
So to be honest, in my experience, no. I mean, I've had a much shorter experience in that kind of sector than, say, for example, my dad has. He spent 40 years in the corporate world before moving to games and stuff. And he certainly told me about how he's seen the culture shifting back when he started. This is sort of our, parents' generation. But I think what his experience was is that this was just not spoken about. If you were struggling at work, if you were stressed, mental health, it just wasn't a thing in the way that it is now. It certainly wasn't treated with any kind of sort of not just seriousness, but just acknowledgement that it's a part of the human condition. You just did your work, went home, and that was sort of it. And I suppose the only sort of social time was often just going to the pub after work with your work colleagues. And if that wasn't your kind of environment, then that's sort of tough for you, really. But that was all there really was. So now I think some of the things that have been, and I speak mainly because I've been working with the family for so long now, but some of the stuff we do, I always think that I know, because it's family, I always think I know what's going on with my parents or my brother outside of the office. And then actually using our game, for example, shows me that actually, oh no, I don't. Like, I always think I know a lot more about them than I do. And you think I know everything by now, considering we've been working together so long, but obviously I know them outside of work. And I'm constantly amazed at the things I find out about them that have, nothing to do with anything I thought, but it gives you like an avenue to really explore those.
No, definitely. And do you think personally that well-being and stress can link to work production at all?
Absolutely. I think that's sort of the heart of the thing, isn't it, really? I think there's different levels of stress. There's certainly like a low level stress that can help get things done, but we're talking about that stress that sort of feels overwhelming when you feel actually you can't cope. And I think what you really want to do is avoid the situation ever getting there in the first place. You, rather than always be fighting fires, if you can sort of be preventative and have measures in place that basically bring down everyone's level of stress generally, that's going to be a lot more effective than just waiting until things reach crisis point and constantly trying to help people when they're in serious situations. Anything that can sort of prevent that happening is going to be way more sort of cost effective in the long run, but also just contribute to people having a much happier work environment.
No, definitely. And then one final question, if you don't mind. Do you think that bosses should take, or they should start to be looking into wellnesses in their office, such as having a gym a gym on the lowest floor, or kind of, offering these workplace wellness and also to take more accountability of their employees' mental health?
For sure, on the accountability, because I think it's just a fact that maybe doesn't go acknowledged enough, that people spend a significant time at work, and the culture and the environment you put people in when they come in to try and help the company succeed, you are responsible for how that environment comes across. It doesn't mean you can have this perfect environment all the time. There's budgets, there's things. I mean, not every company is going to be able to have access to a gym, for example, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't allocate time for activities that may not be literally, people answering emails and being sort of productive in the traditional sense. But if you allocate sort of official time to activities that are going to help people reduce their stress, get to know their colleagues better, be active, make sure that they're sort of feel that they're heard and supported, all of these things, it's just going to have a massive impact on your bottom line. It's certainly not a waste of resources to start investing in this, because it really does contribute to people being much happier in the companies they're in, and then feeling like they can do a much better job.
No, definitely. I completely agree with that. And I think that's some really good points that you've raised. I just wanted to say a massive thanks again for coming and giving your time.
Well, no, thanks very much, Paddy. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
A massive thank you to Luke for coming on the show with us, and a massive thank you to everyone at home as well. If you'd like more content like this, please like and subscribe to our Facebook, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, or our YouTube at Social CIC. That's all we've got time for. We'll see you next week.